gentlemen, welcome to the Extraordinary Family Life Podcast. We are your hosts, Greg and Rachel Denning. We just got back from the magical land of Scotland.
Well,
specifically the Scottish Highlands.
Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks since we've done an episode. Not just because we went to Scotland, but before that we did
a youth retreat
here
in Portugal.
Youth retreat, yeah.
And you guys, it was awesome. So we had 2 weeks. So we hosted a retreat here at our house. Wow, epic. We went paddleboarding.
It was
on the beach, discussions.
It was really powerful too. I mean, at least the feedback that we received was that it was pretty
life-changing.
Special.
In fact, I just got a message this morning from one of the dads. He's like, dude, let me know whenever you're doing anything else for youth. Not only am I sending my daughter that went, but I'm going to send my son too. Like, we're sending them back. They're coming. Right. Let me know.
Which I am planning a couple more. They've got some in the works here.
And then, got other ones. We had some new people who came and joined us, and they were like, "What? This is amazing!" Well, at first, they were like, "Okay, this is a little bit." First, they were like,
"What
is this? You guys
What's
are
going
crazy."
on here? I thought I was coming on like a vacation. My parents didn't really tell me what was happening, but by the end, they're
like, "We're in, man. This is awesome. It's such a transformative experience. So cool." And so then we led a trip for families to Scotland, to the Scottish Highlands, and it was legit. I keep using the word magical, and I think we were all surprised how much we love it. It's one of our new favorite countries.
Yeah, I love
the Highlands, the beauty, the wonder, the waterfalls, the mountains, and the forests, and the
castles,
the heather all across the moor, and I guess you'd call them fjords up there, and then islands.
The lochs is what they are.
Yeah, well.
They're like fjords.
It was awesome. So fun. Again, and transformative as well. We have these great discussions. So those guys who might be new to us, we go out, we're not just going and like checking the boxes, doing a little tourist thing, like, oh, that was cute, that was fun, whatever. Like, we're intentional about...
We do some of that.
Having transformation, like how an experience can change us for the better. And we're facilitating these conversations and experiences that expose us to inspiration and challenge. So we challenge ourselves physically and mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, all of it, so that it just creates this openness and these adventures and these memories, and then we go home better people. I love it. And man, it was so cool. One evening, we all ran down and got in this river in Scotland, a little cold plunge. There was a fisherman there looking at us like, you guys are out of your minds. And we all just bombed in this river. And then the next morning we went and got in the ocean. It was just perfectly still, like this picturesque bay with actually white sand beaches. I never would have thought that would happen in Scotland, but these white sand beaches, calm, glassy water. It was really cold. But we just went in there, and that's how we started the day, with a nice cold plunge in the ocean. Oh, magic, man. Just magic. It was so fun. So, anyways, super excited. Our trips are almost full for Kilimanjaro in February and Mongolia in July. So, there's a couple spots in each of those. If you guys are interested in bucket list, life-changing experiences and adventures, man, come along. Come along for the adventure. It's awesome. But while we were traveling around, there was our little 6-year-old and then another little 6-year-old from the wonderful family that came with us. And they got in this little debate.
It's kind of awkward.
Yeah, it was really awkward. Because they got in a debate about Santa Claus. And so what it does, like, and we love this. Rachel and I love this because we go out, we have experiences, whether we're out with our kids or we're out just having an adventure experience, whatever, and it sparks an idea and it reminds us of things that we decided long ago, or things we've tried or experimented with or changed, and then what it does is it sparks the conversation. Like, oh yeah, and so then it makes us want to share thoughts about it. And so their little conversation about Santa Claus, it's like, oh, we should talk about that in a podcast. So that's why we're doing it.
Well, I think it's always interesting, and this happens with traveling. It definitely happens when you travel with other people, and this is one of the benefits, although sometimes it can be, like I said, awkward or uncomfortable or whatever else, is that you get exposed to new ideas, new places, new things, new concepts, how ways that people do things differently. That's true for us. That's true for the other people coming. We're being exposed to each other. And I think a lot of times in life, we try to avoid that. We try to avoid people that think differently than us or have different ideas or do things differently. But in traveling, that's one of the benefits. And it is really powerful when we can come in contact with those differing ideas or viewpoints and then use it to evaluate, like, how did we come to those conclusions? Why do we think that way? And we do this all the time. We do it constantly. This was just another reminder of something we have done in the past and reminding us why we came to that viewpoint and, how it's working and what benefit, if any, it has. And so we kind of just wanted to talk through it because it's, again, sparked a conversation for us. And that's what we like to do, is have the conversations here on the podcast so we can share, what we're thinking or learning.
And we've always tried to be extremely respectful to other people's beliefs and traditions
and ways of
ideas
doing things
and not contradict. And we try to keep our kids. Rachel was driving; the little ones were in the back, so she couldn't intervene and mediate the debate.
So I'm driving, and this conversation comes up about Santa Claus. Now, if any of you know us, I think we've never taught our children to believe in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or anything like that.
We'll come back to that.
We're going to come back to this about why. We've always been very straightforward with our kids about what's real and what's not, like what's true and what's just make believe. And we've taught our children to be respectful about that, but they also have not had a lot of exposure with people who, I guess, have differing beliefs in that way because, we've been traveling in foreign countries, Muslims and other backgrounds, and they haven't been to public school where you come in contact with people who believe in, believe in Santa Claus and you don't. So I guess the point is, especially our youngest, which this is who it happened with, she hasn't talked to a lot of people that actually believe in Santa Claus. And so, but she's also a very strong personality. She came out of the womb that way. She came out born knowing exactly what she wanted, exactly how to get it. And she's always just had this very strong personality.
Which we love and facilitate and encourage.
Right. And so she's starting to get a little heated in this debate of, no, you're wrong. Santa Claus is not real. It's your parents.
And poor Rachel's up there
and I'm
driving.
Up there driving,
on the left-hand side in Scotland, trying to really focus.
The right-hand side of the car, left-hand side of the road. I'm trying to drive, and she's back here trying to. Again, she's trying to stand up for what she knows is true.
Yeah.
And I don't want to discourage that either, but at the same time, I don't want her to break this poor kid's little heart. Yeah. And really, that's his parents' job to reveal that there's not a Santa Claus, right?
So, I guess I bring that up because had we been next to him, we could have just intervened and diverted it and gone away and left it alone. But because nobody was back there to intervene, they just went after it. So, anyways, it was awkward for Rachel. She was like, "Oh, they're back there debating in the back about Santa Claus." I'm like, "Oh man," because I was driving the other van. But anyways, what it did is it sparked the idea that we want to talk through. That really, you and I started talking about, gosh, probably when we were even engaged. We were having these kind of conversations and really thinking through this. And I was extremely thoughtful about the kind of parent I wanted to be because of the situation I grew up in with my parents getting divorced and stepdads coming and going. And then I ended up living with other families and living in bad neighborhoods and seeing all kinds of domestic disasters. Domestic dumpster fires. Mm-hmm. And so I was very, very thoughtful. And then we were reading like crazy. Both of us were reading like crazy. And so we started to shape our ideas. And it really was this foundational piece of the most important work that you and I will ever do in our lives is in the walls of our own homes. It's our marriage and our parenting. And I genuinely believe that. There's just nothing more important than that. Mm-hmm. It is so profound and so powerful. It goes for generations. It's what shapes the earth. it's just these families. Like, it's a man and a woman getting married, loving each other, serving each other, caring for each other, taking care of each other, and then raising the next generation, these children, to be thoughtful and considerate and have that influence. Now, parenting only works. I want to do an entire new course on this whole concept that parenting is a very specific skill set. It's an extremely specific skill set. And it doesn't carry over. This has always been a conundrum for me. And for years, I was just so confused. I'm like, why? Like, I would know somebody well, and like, they're such a great businessman, or she is such a great leader or teacher, or, man, he is so good with the people in his congregation or the people in the community, like, whatever it is, like, they were so good at it. And then I would observe, like, oh man, they are not good at parenting. But first I didn't realize, I'm like, wait, why? How can you be a really good person and cruddy at parenting? Or how can you be a really good leader and not very good with your kids, or a great speaker or teacher? And I realized, it's a very, very specific skill set. Oh, and please don't misunderstand here. So we're not talking about the parenting of the family that's with us. We're like, don't confuse that. If any of you are thinking like, oh, this is a parenting criticism, it's not. I just brought up the topic. So I get thinking through this, and I mean, we might compare it to a very specific skill. Maybe you are a phenomenal pianist. And you're like, oh my goodness, you have so much musical talent and ability. Here, play this cello. And it's like what? Hey, what's going on? Like, you can read music. You're phenomenal on the piano. Like, just play this cello. And it doesn't carry over. Or you might just be a phenomenal athlete, just tons of athleticism, a phenomenal basketball player, or a runner. Like, you're so great. And we're like, hey, put on these rollerblades. And you're falling all over the place. Or pick up this tennis racket and you hit the tennis ball out of the court. And you're like, wait, what's going on? Like, you're such a great athlete. Why aren't you good at this? And it's because it's so specific.
Right, and there's definitely crossover, like having athleticism or different, being able to read music, that definitely can cross over into these other areas, but there's still a specific set of skills you need to gain in order to become good at that specific thing. And so that's kind of the comparison you're trying to make here is you can be a great person, you can do great things, but to be great at parenting, there are specific skills you need to gain that are specifically related to parenting, which is why we can sometimes see these seeming incongruences of like, this is an amazing person, they're an amazing leader in their church or whatever, and yet their parenting sucks.
It doesn't work at home
or their kids
at all.
just don't seem to be, quote unquote, turning out, right?
Exactly.
And you're like, why? Well, more often than not, the reason is they haven't picked up those very specific skills of parenting.
And strategies.
Right.
So skills and strategies. So all of that was just a lead into today's topic.
To one of the strategies
one strategy
that we picked up and have used.
You have to, like, if you're ever going to succeed with parenting, you have to learn the skill of influence. And a major part of that, so we're zooming in here. So now it's a subtopic of influence, and then a subtopic of getting your kids to believe and listen to, let me reverse that, to listen to and believe what you say.
And to trust what you say.
And trust what you say. So that's where we're going today. And the Santa Claus conversation is what sparked this, like, oh yeah, we should talk about this. Like, we should do a podcast on this one specific topic in parenting of getting to a place where your kids listen to you and believe you and trust you, right? And we started on this early on. I think at least I did. You did too, because of things the way you grew up as well. But man, I had extremely intense feelings about this, perspectives, opinions about this idea of being truthful in all ways and honest, no facades, no faking, because so much of what I saw, like, I would see people were fake and phony. They would say one thing to one person, and then I'd be standing there, and then they would say the exact opposite thing to someone else. And as a kid, I'm standing there like, are you kidding me? the doorbell rings, they open it up, and they put, oh, hey, hi, oh, yeah, what, blah, blah, you know, this big show, close the door, and I'm like, that was, what a total lie. It was so bogus. And so I constantly saw these examples of the facade, the mask, the two-faced, and then, of course, we've all seen it, the gossiping, the backbiting. You treat someone to their face one way, and then behind their back just say wretched things. We've all observed that. And, man, I just came to absolutely abhor that. So I made a commitment going into our marriage. Mm-hmm. Now, so Rachel, I'm like, oh, okay, never, ever, ever, ever am I going to, like, pull the wool over on my own kids. Or anyone else while my kids are observing. Like, I'm just going to be me. Mm-hmm. In public, in private, what you see is what you get. I'm going to be across the board. This is how I'm going to be. I'm never going to lie to them. I'm never going to deceive them. I'm never going to water down things. I'm never going to, like, sugarcoat stuff. And we do this with kids all the time because we think they can't handle it or whatever. We make up these bogus stories. Like somebody, you know, something terrible happens in your neighborhood or in your church congregation or in your own family. And instead of telling your kids the truth about this individual's behaviors that led to those consequences, you make some story up about, oh, well, they're having this thing, there was this little stuff, and you make up this story that's not true. And so, ultimately, it leads to distrust.
Well, okay, so basically we came into marriage with, you had this idea, this belief of being what we now call congruent. We wanted our outward public behavior to match up with our private behavior. Now, I would, just as a disclaimer, like I would say there's definitely things that's private behavior that is going to remain private behavior. Like it's just going to be that way.
I'm never going to use the bathroom in public.
Right. Like that's just something I would never do. If I wouldn't use the bathroom in public. We wouldn't make love in public. Those types of things. Like there's always going to be private behavior. So there are things that are always going to be private behavior, and that's okay. You don't have, some people think in the name of being authentic, you have to like put everything out there. Like,
go take a dump in a public place.
Right. Or, like, for me, crying is something I do to my husband. I cry to him because he's someone who can help me with my problems. I'm not going to just cry on Instagram because these people can't help me. And to me, that's not being authentic. Being authentic isn't putting everything out there. It's putting out what's appropriate and what is true and honest, but also appropriate for public behavior type thing. So in that framework, we seek to be congruent as much as possible, right?
Yes.
We're going to have our private behavior be equal to our public behavior, except for when it's not appropriate.
That's maybe a different
it's a little
podcast
side tangent.
But sometimes we get confused. Like there are there are things that are private and should be private.
Right.
But that's not an excuse to hide terrible vices and addictions. Yeah. Like, it's my private, it's me personal. It's like, no, you're hiding something horrendous, especially any dishonesty or for malicious behavior. People hide it all the time, and then their public persona is, oh, this, that, and the other thing's great. And you're like, no, man, you're a cesspool of problems, and then you're hiding all of that and saying, well, it's just my private life. And maybe that's a different topic. It can be totally misused and misaligned.
Right.
But there are some very few private things, but we wanted to be just congruent and completely honest because I wanted to have appropriately honest. I wanted to have massive influence with my children. And everyone. So I have to speak the truth because any instance, and this is where I think we're going, any instance of dishonesty, deceit, incongruence, or a watering down when it gets fuzzy, where you feel like anytime your children feel like any of that has happened, whether they cognitively process it or not, it's going to create some neural connections that said, hey, they weren't straight with me. Mm-hmm. They weren't straight with me. And even if that's subconscious, later on, if you do it when they're toddlers, when they're teens, there's just going to be this warning in their brain saying,
right.
I'm not so sure. I'm not sure if I can believe them because they've been dishonest, or they've withheld the truth from me, or they've done it to others in my presence.
Mm-hmm.
So if maybe you don't do it straight to your kids, but you do it with others, and they see that, they're like, hey, wait a minute, you said this about so-and-so, and then when they came over, you said something totally different. Like, kids see that,
mm-hmm.
and they record it. It's recorded in them.
Right. And they can't articulate it or put their finger on it, but it does become a part of this subconscious programming that then plays out in the teenage rebellion that we see, or the other issues that parents come to all the time with things. And part of it, again, it's a very complicated thing, but we know, and we've seen through experience and through working with tons of people, that a part of that is this underlying sense of distrust or unbelievability that your kids have picked up by realizing that you're not always playing straight with them. And that, people ask us all the time about our kids, because we really have really great teenagers. We do. I mean, they're amazing. And one of the most amazing parts about it is that they still look to us as leaders for advice, guidance. Like, they want that. It's not where in many teenage relationships they don't want to turn to their parents,
or young adults,
advice,
or adults, yeah,
as young adults.
They start going away. They discredit their parents, what they're saying, and they really pull away. Where our kids have not pulled away at all.
They have actually done the opposite. In fact, our two oldest, especially, as they've gone out on their own in the world and started working and doing other things and interacting, they come back to us saying, "Wow, like, you guys really have it together. You really know what you're talking about. I need and want your advice." We just barely met up on the Scotland trip we went on. Our oldest son came and visited with us for 2 days on the trip, and I walked with him and had a conversation where he was basically like, "I need more of you guys in my life. Like, I haven't had enough the past 6 months. I need more of your advice. I want to make sure that I have your guidance, because I want to make sure my life turns out as good as possible. And I know that you at least have some of those answers," meaning that we've been straight with them about what we've learned, what works, what doesn't work, and he's able to see it play out in our own life. Not that we have all the answers, not that we know everything, not that we're perfect. None of that is true. But we've been working hard to figure out what works and what doesn't work, and we've always been straight with our kids about it. Now, that started, and this is where we make the connection here in a way, with us not telling them things that weren't true, which for us included something like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. Like, yeah, we got it that people like to do it and it's fun and all of that. I get the side of that.
My guess is that the vast majority of you listening probably did the whole Santa Claus thing with your kids.
Right.
And it's cool. We're not here to condemn. But what we decided, like, wait a minute, that's, for us, our unique perspective on this was like, that's a straight up lie. I'm sitting here convincing my innocent, believing children.
Who believes everything I say.
They're hanging on every word. Like, we are their parents. I'm sitting here doing this whole charade to convince them to believe in something that's totally untrue.
Right.
And then when they find out, and we might think, oh, it's harmless. Like, everybody did it. It's for generations. Like, what a no big deal. But there's a neural connection that's imprinted, that's recorded in their heads of like, wait a minute, they put on this huge act for years to convince me of something that's totally untrue.
Right. And
wow.
And perhaps maybe for me as well, it was something that I could easily see was not beneficial for our children, because I vividly remember my own time when I found out that Santa Claus wasn't real. Like, I was in kindergarten. That's when I found out, because I went to school and talked to other kids. And I came home one day after a kid had told me at school that Santa Claus wasn't real, and I went to my mom and I said, Mom, is Santa Claus real? And she said, go talk to your dad. And I went to my dad, and he sat me down and he said, well, what do you think? Do you think Santa Claus could really fly around the world in one night, blah, blah, blah? And I was like, well, no. And part of me was saying, well, no, I never thought that was real. Like, I always thought that didn't make any sense. But you had told me, this is the conversation I had in the back of my head, you had told me that it was true.
The people I trust the most in my life keep telling me that something that doesn't make any sense is true.
Right. And so, obviously, as a 6-year-old, I couldn't articulate that, but I still remember that. I remember that feeling and that sense of like, no, I didn't think that was true. I didn't think that was possible. But everyone around me had gone to such a great, had made all this effort to make me believe that was true.
Right.
And so it's something that's interestingly always stuck with me. So when we started raising our own kids, I just thought, well, no, I'm not. Like, it's fun. We can pretend. We can play. And my oldest daughter, ironically enough, she wanted to pretend. And she knew he wasn't real, but loved to pretend that he was. Yep. And I was like, okay, yeah, we can pretend that this is from Santa Claus or whatever. And the rest of my kids have never really cared at all. They just thought, I don't care. If I get presents, I don't care who it comes from, right?
Well, but it's kind of ironic, too, is like so many Christians especially, they want Christmas to be about Christ, but they put on this huge performance about Santa. Mm-hmm. And then they're like, well, I want it to be more about Jesus. They're like, well, we'll stop putting so much emphasis on Santa. So there's another incongruence there.
Right.
You want it to be about Jesus, and yet the excitement, the hype, this big story, all the to-do for a whole month is about Santa Claus.
And I know that there are people that go to the effort to not do that, but my 9-year-old, she might have been younger when she said this, but she said something to me. She's like, well, how do I know, that Jesus is real? And for me, that was one of the reasons I never wanted to pretend that Santa Claus was real, because I never wanted them to say, oh, well, if you're lying to me about Santa Claus, how do I know you're not lying about Jesus, right? Yep. And so that was one of the reasons why I always wanted to be straight about it. Yep. Like, this, as far as I know, is make-believe. This, as far as I know, is real. So if I believe in Jesus and that he was a real person, I'm going to be honest about that, and I'm not going to have the same energy, effort, excitement, passion about something that I know is not real, right? I'm not going to do that about Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. We can read the stories and we can, have fun with it, knowing that it's make-believe, knowing that it's a story. In fact, I have a book about the history of how Santa Claus came to be, and I read it every year because I find it interesting about all the different Saint Nics and this and that and the other. I find that all very fascinating, and I share that with the kids, and it's okay that that's a story thing, but we need to know that that's a story, and our kids need to know that that's a story and not that that's real. And while that may seem insignificant in some ways, I truly believe that it's that type of attitude that we've had and approach that we've had to our kids that has laid the foundation for them as young adults to say, you know what, I believe everything you say. I know you don't know everything, but I know that you're going to tell me what you believe is true.
Yeah, you
and
will
tell it to
be
me straight
with me. Yep. There's not going to be any deception, or in the next level of this is exaggeration.
Yeah.
Or, we're kind of, what's the word? What's the term where you just kind of, you take something that's true and you...
embellish it?
There's no embellishment. It's like, just be straight with us.
Yeah.
And then they're going to come and say, look, I'm going to ask your opinion because I know you'll be straight with me.
Exactly.
That's gigantic trust.
Huge. I think it's huge. Now, along with the lines of no embellishment, because, that's another thing we do is we're not embellishing on the truth. We're not exaggerating things more than they are. Like, we just say, this is where it's at, and this is what it is, and this is real, and this is not. This is make-believe. But part of that, too, is we're always following through on what we do say. And I know we've talked about this before, but I think it's an important connection. So that if we say something like, hey, if you do this, I'm going to do that, well, we follow through with that.
Yes.
We do it. And so it kind of goes along with this entire idea of being truthful and honest with your kids. That includes keeping your word. So when you say something, you do it. You actually follow through so that they learn to know first, you're going to tell me the complete truth. And second, if you tell me something that you're going to do something, you are going to do it.
Yeah. Well, man, we could hit. I kind of want to have a little straightforward list here, but number one, fundamental, don't lie. Just don't lie to your kids. And if they ask something that's tough or awkward, or might even be like they're not ready for it, they're maybe too young or mature, just give them a straight answer and tell them it's like, I'll tell you later. Or tell them, look, I'll explain it in a simple way. I'll give you more details later on when you're older, but I'll answer that question. Don't avoid it. Don't make crap up. Don't tell
them about the stork when there's
that's
not
what I
a
was thinking.
stork.
I was like, there's no stork. Don't lie about that crap.
Now, one way that I approach things like that is I tell them as much as they want to hear. And I start by giving a very simplified version. And then if they keep asking questions, I add a little bit more. And then if they keep asking more questions, I add more information. But once they stop asking questions, they're good. Their question has been answered. Yeah, they'll ask again later when they need more information. But as long as they keep asking, I'll keep giving more. And once they stop asking, then I stop giving. I'm not going to now go into the full detailed,
so when
here's
your 5-year-old's like, where do babies come from? Don't give a doctoral dissertation about reproductive organs.
Right, exactly.
It's way too much.
I start with the basics. They grow in my belly, and then I give birth to them. And then if that's enough, great, they're done. They're done for now. So that's one way of approaching that. But you're being honest, but you're not being overly... You're not sharing more than
you need. You can overshare. So now, that's not the same when your kids are tweens and teens and you're still undersharing. Like, we'll get back to that later, kids. And you got a 17-year-old that knows nothing about it because you're like, you're not ready. I'm not ready to tell you.
Exactly.
Like, you got to be straight with them.
And that is kind of the hard, uncomfortable part. I mean, again, on this trip, it happened a couple times. My daughter overheard someone using the word puberty. She's 9. And so while we're hiking with the group in the forests of Scotland, she says, randomly, she was saying something else, and then she said, what's puberty, right? And I just gave her a straight answer. I just said, that's when your body starts changing. That's when girls start growing breasts. And that was enough for her at the time. She's like, oh, okay. And she kept going on her hike.
Yep, that was a straight answer.
But I gave a straight answer, and I didn't just downplay it and be like, oh, don't talk about that. We'll have to come up with that later. Like, yeah, I didn't want to answer the question in front of everyone, but I did because I didn't want her to think it's not something she can ask.
Right. Don't avoid answering questions.
Right.
Give them answers. Again, you're creating these neural connections they're subconsciously making all these neural connections that are connected to you.
Right.
So your behavior, your interaction with them, what you say, what you don't say. And people make crap up all the time. Like, oh, if you don't say this specific prayer before you get on an airplane, it's going to crash. Like, no, it's not. Like, don't say things like that.
And don't teach your kids things like that.
Or the other one's like, you cannot eat food until you've blessed it. If you don't bless it, you probably get sick. That is not true. And yet, with good intention, you keep teaching these things that just aren't true.
Right.
So then, or like, the only good people are Christian people or whatever. I mean, that's just something I've heard. And then when people get out and they have experiences that are outside of what you've been saying, they're like, "Sheesh, those people are full of crap." And you never, ever, ever want your own children to think you're full of crap.
Exactly. Because then that creates other problems. It creates faith crises. It creates, rebellion, of course. That was another interesting conversation we had, too, in the car. My 9-year-old, again, was sitting up front with us. And I don't know how it came up or what we were talking about, but somehow we got on the topic of Muslims. And one of our friends said something about the Muslims being, I don't even remember. It was something about some Muslims being kind and loving and patient. And she's like, but all Muslims are like that, right? This was after we had spent 3 months living in Turkey and then in Egypt, and her interaction with all the Muslims there was that they're very kind and loving people.
Unbelievable.
And I thought, well, yeah, she doesn't have that view that a lot of people do of Muslims being violent and, like ISIS or whatever that many people do have. And I thought, yeah, that's her viewpoint. She, from her own experience, has seen, this is what most Muslims are like, kind and loving and generous and family-oriented. That's her worldview. That's just kind of a side
Literally,
viewpoint
since
there.
she was tiny.
Yeah.
When she was tiny, I'd put her in a backpack. We were living in Morocco, and she'd get fussy, and so I'd go walk for miles through the Medina and the souks, and
Marrakesh.
people would stop and give her the little kiss on the cheek and give her gifts. They would, like, whenever I walked past, they'd stop, oh, she's so beautiful, and they'd kiss her cheek, and then reach over and grab a grape or an orange or an apple or pomegranate, anything, a date, and give it to her. Right, from some random shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper's like, oh, blessings. I mean, so from very, very little, she has had this neural connection, this recording in her being of these wonderful Muslim people.
Right. And so her immediate response to whatever was said was, well, that's what all Muslims are like, right?
So,
and I did have to say, well, there are some that aren't like that.
Right, because it would be dishonest for us to say all of them are kind.
Yes,
but
exactly.
it's also dishonest if we're like, oh, Muslims are terrorists.
Exactly.
That's an outright lie.
Right.
Or all Mexicans are this way. Or whatever. Any kind of racism, any kind of prejudice like that, it's actually a dishonesty.
Right.
So you get some kind of little fixed mindset about it, and you tell your kids that, you're lying to them.
No,
and they're going to...
You don't think you're lying to them, and
but
you're
you
not
are
trying to lie to them.
Yes, but I guess that's where I'm going to be frank here.
Right.
You're lying. So if you embellish something, you make something up, you say some little cute trite thing, and you think it's just being cute or whatever, you're lying. If you try to convince your kids, you take them snipe hunting, that there really are snipes, you're lying.
Or jackalopes.
Yeah. Or let's go find a jackal. Like I have no problem being imaginative and playful with my kids. Like I'll tell them, like, hey, unicorns aren't real. Let's go look for unicorns. And we're wandering through the woods, jumping over things, chasing. We're looking for unicorns that they know full well don't exist. But so we have no problem with play and imagination.
Right.
But I'm not lying to them.
Well, yeah, we're always straightforward. We will tease our kids and we'll be playful with our kids, but we tell them, like, oh, no, we're just because they'll say, wait, is that real? Is that true? And we're like, no, we're just teasing, but let's pretend. I remember something when I was young. My grandpa used to always tell me, like, oh, don't swallow a watermelon seed because it's going to grow into a watermelon in your belly, And I remember the adults around me full-heartedly trying to convince me that was true. It was really happening. Seed?
Oh, no, now it's going to grow. And I remember being worried about it as a kid.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's those types of things that we think are fun and playful and harmless, but unless the kids, especially young kids, the younger they are, the more they just believe whatever you say. They have a hard time distinguishing between truth and reality already. And so if you tell them, they just believe it.
Yep.
And so we have to be very honest with them. And that doesn't mean we can't be playful. We can't say that, but then when they say, really? You say, no, I'm just teasing. That won't really happen.
So you can use your imagination, and we can create things.
We can make believe that would happen, but then...
And I go all in with that.
Yeah.
But they know full well, this is just a game.
Exactly.
We're playing.
Right.
And let's just go on with other harder truths. Adultery. Somebody in your family commits adultery. Somebody in your family commits suicide. Somebody in your family makes really bad decisions. And alcoholism, abuse, or drugs. Be straight. Now, the littler ones may not need all the details, but be straight with them. When there's been things like that in our extended families, we've just told them, like, yeah, this is what happened.
Now, it doesn't mean we're being condemnatory,
right,
or that we're being judgmental per se, but we because of all the research we have done in human psychology and behavior and peak performance and like what actually works and what actually doesn't work, we're being honest about, yeah, if you do these types of things, this is generally what happens.
Yep.
And this isn't judging so-and-so. This is simply saying, oh, well, I've noticed this with them, and I've noticed it in these other people too. When you do these things, it leads to these outcomes.
Yep.
When you do drugs, it leads to this. When you do this, it leads to that. We're very straightforward with that without condemning the person. We're not saying they're a bad person. We're not saying that they have no worth or value. We're not saying, we're not saying anything about them. We're just simply saying that these behaviors, these actions produce these types of results. And that, I think, also is very important. It's hard for us to do that as people and parents sometimes because we can feel that it's gossiping. And we're always clear with that with our kids. Like, in fact, they kind of laugh sometimes because we're like, we're not gossiping. We are talking about this behavior leading to these outcomes. Now, we love this person.
Oh, go ahead.
They have all of these admirable qualities, but we want you to be clear that these types of actions often lead to these types of outcomes.
And when our kids were younger, we had some great family friends, and the kids adored them, and then they got divorced, and he was like, well, why aren't they together anymore? Why aren't they married anymore? And it was because of a pornography problem. So it's just a straight answer. Like, oh, he looks at pornography, and that ruined their marriage. So it wasn't like, oh, they don't get along anymore. Oh, they just decided not to be together anymore. Like, bull. Straight up.
There are causes to the things that happen.
And we want them to know. It's like they made some choices that have consequences. So our kids get it. And we're real about what's happening in the world too. And I talk to them about the human trafficking problem and that kind of stuff. And I'm not scaring them. Okay, here's another thing. Parents love to use scare tactics because they think that's the way to convince my kids not to do bad things or be careful, is by using these massive scare tactics. And again, at the end of the day, it's dishonesty. It's a lie. You're exaggerating something, or no, if you do that, you'll die. If you do that, this will happen. It's like, no, it's not. That's not true.
Right. In that framework there, or with that in mind, it is okay to say that there's a chance you could die. It's not high. If there is something that is actually dangerous, then be honest with it. But if it's something that there's little to no chance of death, well, don't use death as the threat or the scare tactic, like you were saying. You have to be straight. And being straight means not being overly over-exaggerating the risks, nor under-exaggerating them. And that's another thing, too. Like, another thing people have asked is, like, how do you allow your kids to do all these risky and dangerous things? Because they've seen our boys doing flips and jumps and jumping off roofs into swimming pools and cliffs and all of this. And they're like, how do you do that and how do you stay safe? Well, one of the reasons is we don't over or under exaggerate the risks. And we teach them to appropriately gauge the risks so that they learn for themselves to look at a situation as it is and determine how risky it may or may not be, and whether or not they have the skills to be able to handle that risk.
I thought of a perfect example. When our oldest daughter turned 18, she wanted to go skydiving. Desperately wanted to go skydiving. I think it was like the week before she turned 18. We were going to go to a skydiving company in Georgia, and an 18-year-old girl, her parachute didn't open.
On her birthday.
Yep. And they died.
And she died.
And so that was just a few miles from our house with a skydiving company we were going to go to.
We were going to use.
And so we had a choice. Do we not say anything? Do we exaggerate it? Like, what do we do?
Right.
And we were just straight with them. Like, hey, we were going to go to skydiving on your birthday, which is in a week. A girl just went for her 18th birthday, and her parachute didn't open. We don't know what happened, but they died. And so my daughter was like, yeah, let's not go.
Right.
And yet our whole family has since gone skydiving. And we love skydiving.
She actually didn't go.
She didn't go because she was somewhere else.
With us.
Yeah. And so she's like the only one who hasn't gone.
Right.
Even our younger kids have gone. Right. But again, you're just going to be straight. You're going to be honest. You're not going to exaggerate. You're not going to
Right. You're not going to hide
explain
the realities of things, but you're just going to tell them as they are. Another example was our son does parkour, our oldest son, and we went to a castle in Lithuania, and he wanted to do a trick where you run up the wall and you do a backflip. And we were standing there, I was going to record it, and he just kept testing it, and I could just tell he just felt like it wasn't right, the angle, everything wasn't right, and he just decided not to do it. And we fully supported that. We weren't going to say, oh, what's wrong? Like, you can do it.
Scared?
You
being
scared?
Chicken?
It's like, no, you get to gauge whether or not you have the skills or feel that you are comfortable taking this risk. Yeah. And I think that's...
you're a wimp if you don't do this. You're a baby. That's not true. Again, like, we've got to be more responsible with our language.
Right. if you want to try to teach your children to see the world around them and to gauge it appropriately. And if they feel like they can't or shouldn't do something, then that's up to them to decide. And I think that we have encouraged that from a young age. We encourage them to take risks, quote unquote, whether that's climbing a tree or jumping off something or whatever. But if they honestly felt like they weren't ready or they weren't capable, then we supported that. Now, we may have realized...
Or if we saw they weren't ready or capable, we would say that.
Absolutely.
Or the opposite. Hey, no, you're ready. You can do this.
Yeah, exactly. So that they know we're there too. We're there supporting them. We're also looking out for them. And we're not going to encourage them to do something that they're not ready or able to do. And we're going to tell them whether they are or not, based on our own...
Ooh, I thought of another example that I've seen so many times. If you come up and say, how do I look in this? Or my kids are like, hey, how does this look? I'm going to be honest, right? And I've seen again and again and again, with good intentions, moms or friends are like, oh, no, oh, this, oh, you are that, oh, woo, wah. And they don't want to speak the truth. And they'll even, right behind their back, be like, oh, that looks terrible, or, oh, they look, oh, wow, this is bad. But they won't. Like, you could walk up with a huge booger, and you're like, do I look good? Oh, my goodness, you look fantastic. It's amazing. Oh, everything's great. And then later find out, like, you had a huge booger, and nobody said anything. And my fly was down. Like, why didn't you tell me my fly was down? Oh, I was awkward. I didn't want you to feel bad. And you're like, oh, so you lied to my face because you didn't want to be awkward or whatever.
Yeah.
And I get that. It is awkward. But we will be straight with them. Not rude, not mean, just straight.
And I think all of us are fully aware of that because we all do it in our family. We go around and say, how do I look? Does this look good on me? And we're all straight with each other. We'll say, yeah, no, that looks great. And sometimes we have different opinions, Some of us might think it looks great and the other doesn't. But
which is great. We're being honest.
Yeah, we're being honest.
Yeah.
We're being straightforward of like, no, this is great. You look good or you don't look good in that outfit or whatever. And even my 9-year-old, she's like so good at this already that I can go to her and I know, like I trust her advice. I'll be like, Sage, how's this outfit look? And she'll be like, nah, I'm not so sure about that. And she just knows and tells it to me straight,
And it's awesome. And we haven't encouraged dishonesty in her or in any of them.
Which can become uncomfortable. Yes. Back to this conversation in certain situations, and it's difficult because there is a fine line between being nice and being dishonest, right? And there's a fine line between being mean and being honest. Yeah. And sometimes being honest feels like we're being mean sometimes, and so we avoid it. I think even with our own kids, we want to avoid it because we don't want to be mean.
Well, we avoid it with ourselves.
Right.
Like if we're fat, we won't even use the word fat. And
it's offensive.
We won't even use it with ourselves. You don't say, no, that I'm fat. Like this is fat. This chunk right here, like this is fat, and I'm fat. I'm overweight. And we'll even use overweight soft. Like, no, like, I got to burn this.
If what Greg is saying now even bothers you, well, go listen to our podcast episode about body shaming, and you'll understand why fat is actually just a signal from your body that something's off and needs to be addressed, that's leading to disease.
Right. And so we need to have that honest, like,
honesty,
fat is fat. Like, yeah, you got too much fat on your body. You can go measure it. It's a percentage. You should be in a healthy range, and if you're over that range, you're fat. Which
means that you are facing future long-term consequences. And again, this comes back to our honesty with our kids. And I actually wanted to touch on this because you mentioned sometimes that, people scare tactics, trying to scare kids and different things. I have found that this approach that we take of being straightforward and honest with our kids, like I think it actually helps them feel that the world is more in their control than they realize. Because when you start to make connections for people, when you start to make connections for your kids, that there is cause and effect. Somebody didn't just commit suicide because they were unlucky or they had a bad day. There was a long sequence of choices and thoughts and actions and behaviors that led to that outcome. It wasn't just random. Same with disease. Same with like so many things. When you start to make connections for your kids, I know this is true for me and I know it's true for them, like you begin to see that there's patterns in the world. There are patterns. There are certain actions that lead to certain results. And when you understand that, you actually feel like you have a lot more control over your life, over your actions, of course, over the outcomes and results you achieve. And so I think it feels a lot safer.
Yep.
Now, that doesn't mean that there's not tragedy sometimes and there's not things that happen to you out of your control. But
and
overall...
stupid mistakes you make that you should be honest with.
Right. Stupid mistakes that you'll make, that's still going to happen.
And tell your kids that. Don't be like, oh, yeah, I'm having a bad day. Like, no, I made a really bad decision. And there are major consequences to this.
Exactly. But when they have that framework, again, it comes back to this trust. You feel like you have a lot more trust for yourself, for the people around you, for God, for the universe. Like, there's a lot more trust when you feel like there's more in your power than you realized.
Yep. Man, so the invitation today for all of us is just really examine how responsible you're being with your language and your words in every aspect. We've tried to share a lot of examples here, but just examine, say, where aren't we being completely honest or transparent or truthful? Where do we put on charades and a big act and a facade, or where am I wearing a mask? And I guess the mask thing's a big one, because they can often see past the mask. Mm-hmm. And you're putting on this mask and they're like, that's bogus. Like, you're pretending that everything's great in your marriage when they can clearly see it's not. Mm-hmm. And they're like, hey, what's up? Oh, no, everything's fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. You're like, no, now not only are things not fine, you're lying right to my face. That gets recorded. Mm-hmm. And then later on, when you need some influence with them, that influence bank account is overdrawn.
Right. And
so be honest.
And that doesn't mean that you need to share everything with your children, because they're not meant to carry the full burden of adult responsibility. But you can share enough, kind of back to the previous thing of talking about sex or whatever other topic, share enough that it's real and it's true, but it's not oversharing. It's not more than they need or want at this time. So, if my kids see me crying or something, I'll tell them, like, oh, it's this thing, which is a part of it, but, it's also true. And so that they know I'm being honest with them, and that I also can be sad or upset about things, and that's okay, and we work through it, and we resolve it and whatnot. But I'm not just like, oh, everything's fine.
Because they're watching, they're observing way more than they even can say or articulate. Mm-hmm. They're picking up on everything, and parents sometimes are more clueless than their kids, believing that the kids aren't picking up. They aren't noticing. Like, you're out of your mind if you think your kids don't know that something's up. Yeah. And so work with them, and as they're mature and talk through it and help them see your results, and tie your results to your actions for them. Help them make those connections. Mm-hmm. And again, if you're a big talker, they can see your results and they can hear your words, and they know well enough that, like, this doesn't line up. This doesn't match up. So any incongruence in your life, they're going to see that. So if you just talk and talk and talk endlessly about being healthy, and you're an unhealthy person and you're out of shape, they're going to be like, okay, there's something there. And if you're like, oh, this and that, abundant, or whatever, money, and they're like, yeah, but you're broke. Or the opposite. This one's interesting. It wasn't until one of my coaching clients, like, I can't remember, I think he was like married and like having kids before he ever realized his parents were loaded. But this whole childhood, they had millions of dollars, and they acted like they were broke. Mm-hmm. They put on this big thing. They wanted their children to believe. And again, it was with good intentions, like, we don't want our kids to love money, or that riches are evil. So it's like this wrong fixed mindset. So we want our children to think we're poor. And so they put on this huge charades. They had millions of dollars in the bank account, but they always acted poor. Oh, we can't afford that. We can't do that. You got to work for things. And it was with good intentions to teach your kids to work, but you were lying the whole time. So then when you grow up, you're like, they lied to me.
Right.
For decades.
You feel betrayed. And, I mean, betrayal is one of the worst things that can happen to you. And so you never want your kids to grow up and feel that they were betrayed by their parents for whatever reason. That's just not a good situation to be in if you ever want to have a long-term relationship with your kids and to have long-term influence with them.
So be honest about your health. Be honest about your finances. Be honest about your relationships. Be honest about the work you do and why it works or why it doesn't. Be honest about mistakes you've made in the past or mistakes you're making. Be honest about like what's working, what's not working, and who you're becoming. Just be honest, and it's so powerful.
I think that one thing I always do is whenever I'm going to say something to my spouse or my kids especially, it's automatic now, but it's this little internal check, like, is this true? Is this truth? Am I speaking truth? And I would like to say never, although we're trying to be responsible with our language, I'm sure once in a while, I never speak falsehood. So I don't care what that is. If my kids come to me, they ask for something, they ask me a question, I'm going to speak what I believe is true. Now, sometimes I have to get creative with that, so I can speak truth without revealing too much. For example, say we're making love and my kids knock on the door. I don't tell them that's exactly what we're doing, but I might say something like, I'm naked right now, right? Which is true. But it's all they need to know. So I'm speaking truth. I'm being truthful. I am saying what is true, but I'm giving them what they need, not everything that they don't need, right? But if you can make that a part of your way of being, I think that just builds this healthy foundation for having this relationship of trust. That you just have this very strong, healthy relationship of trust with your spouse, with each of your children, where they just know. You're honest with me. You tell me exactly how it is, and you're not going to lie to me.
And then you have influence.
And then you have influence and power with your children. And then they listen to you.
Yeah, exactly.
And they want to do what you ask because they know that you're only asking what's best for them.
Yep. And you wouldn't lie to them or deceive them or manipulate them with some kind of story.
To try to get them to do what you want them to do.
Yeah, you're like, hey, if I ask my kids to do something, they're like, okay, there's a reason here. He's not trying to manipulate me. There's no motive here. Like, they're not trying to guess. Like, what does mom really want? Like, what's going on? She's like, no, if she wants this done, like, okay, she wants this done. There's no shady,
she's not trying to play
weird,
a game with me.
Yeah, you're not playing these weird mental games or emotional things.
To try to get me to do the thing you want me to do. You're just telling me how it is. And this is the other part of it, too. I know we've explained it in our other coaching. Like, if our kids ask us, well, why are you asking me to do this? We give them an answer. Right. We have a real answer, one that makes sense. That, like, this is why. And then they say, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then they do it because it does make sense. Or, which also happens, they say, well, that doesn't make sense, and here's why. And they sometimes talk me out of it, where I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. Doesn't make sense. Guess you don't have to do that one.
And like you alluded to earlier, maybe one of the most important things is just keeping your word. Mm-hmm. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Like, if you commit to something, keep the commitment. Mm-hmm. And stop talking so much and let your results do the talking. Like, prove your honesty with your actions. And just be straight. I think you'll find, and again, we're not condemning you as evil, malicious people, but I think you'll find there's probably lots of instances of dishonesty that you weren't. It's not intentional, but you're like, ugh.
And sometimes it's subconscious.
Yeah, you're like, man, I've been saying that for a long time. Or I've been doing that, and it's not true. Mm-hmm. I've been painting this picture that's inaccurate.
Right.
And so bring it back. You don't have to be rude. You don't have to be overly blunt. You just be honest. And honesty will lead to trust. Trust leads to influence, and you will be a much more effective parent and leader. Boom. Okay, love you guys. Thanks for listening. Reach up.